Welcome to another night with Sleepy History. Prepare to close your eyes and drift off on a journey through time among ancient gods, legendary heroes, and fantastical creatures. Tonight, we'll delve into Japanese mythology, a world so complex and profound that it has shaped the identity of an entire nation. Tonight's focus is on exploring the Kojiki and the Nihongi, the sacred texts that form the basis of these stories. The Kojiki, or record of ancient affairs, can be seen as the diary of the gods, filled with anecdotes, romances, and conflicts that narrate the creation of the universe from its very beginnings. It was compiled in the early 8th century at the behest of the imperial court, with one fundamental question in mind: where did we come from? The answer had to be divine to legitimize the emperor's power. On the other hand, the Nihongi, or Chronicles of Japan, is the official, more serious and formal version. It was written around the same time as the Kojiki, but with the intention of impressing other courts, particularly the Chinese. While the Kojiki is a literary work containing poetry and folklore, the Nihongi seeks to provide historical accuracy to the divine narrative through precise dates and details. Together, they offer a comprehensive view of Shinto and the Japanese worldview. Shinto is the native religion of Japan, distinct from other religions that have a single founder or commandments. It is based on the belief that everything, from the tallest mountain to the humblest blade of grass, possesses a divine spirit, or kami. This faith encourages respect for and harmony with nature, manifesting itself in festivals, rituals, and shrines. Learning about Japanese mythology is not just about learning the names of gods. It's about delving into the essence of a people who see the sacred in everyday life. The myths explain the creation of the world, legitimize the imperial line, and show why the Japanese have a deep respect for nature. So relax, close your eyes, and prepare to hear a story thousands of years old. Before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who joins us from all over the world. This is Sleepy History, and my goal is for this story to take you on a unique journey as you find peaceful sleep. To understand the beginning, imagine a time before time, where nothing existed, only a silent void. Gradually, that void began to fill with a chaos that was both everything and nothing. Like a thick soup, primordial matter swirled. Imagine a dark, infinite ocean, but instead of water, it was a dense mud containing the potential of all that would come to be. In the midst of this chaos, a light mist emerged and slowly rose, separating what would become the sky, Takamagara, from what would become the earth. Think of this as a cosmic distillation. The light rose, the heavy remained below. This act of separation is essential in Japanese mythology. It is the moment when the universe begins to take shape. From this mist emerged the first gods, formless, like whispers, primordial forces born without a mate or birth. The first was Ōkuninushi, the god of the center of the august sky, the consciousness of the universe that sets everything in motion. Then came Takemimuzubi and Kamimuzubi, symbols of growth, production, energy, and fertility that drive creation. Together they form the Koto Amatsukami, the original trinity that initiates everything ethereal and fundamental without physical form. After their appearance, these first kami hid themselves from the universe. Their task was to initiate the process and then observe, like architects who draw up the plans and allow others to build. With them, chaos began to order itself, and the universe had its first glimmer of structure. Heaven above, earth below. Creation continued with a succession of divine births. From the reed that grew in that formless earth, two new gods emerged: Umashur Ashikabi Hikoji and Aim no Tokatachi. Their names reflect poetry and a connection to nature, reminding us that life springs spontaneously from the earth, like a reed stalk. Up to this point, the gods emerged from nothing and withdrew. Without a defined gender, they did not intervene beyond their initial appearance. But the story changes with the next 5 generations. These new deities no longer arise alone, but in pairs, a male god and a female goddess, who are both siblings and spouses. It may seem strange today, but in many ancient mythologies, creation occurs through the union of the masculine and the feminine. The first of these pairs are the first beings tasked with working with primordial matter. Then other pairs appear, each with a name that reflects a quality of the forming world, integrating origins Despite their importance, their primary function was to pave the way for the couple who would truly shape the world. In the seventh generation, the story changes. Unlike their predecessors, who were born and then hid, the final couple will be different. They will be the culmination of the entire process, the couple who will give life to the Japanese archipelago and the myriad kami that inhabit it. This couple is Izanagi and Izanami, the august man and the august woman. They are the youngest and the most daring of all. The Council of the Gods chose them to leave the high celestial plane and descend to the formless earth, transforming chaos into a home for all beings. Until now, creation had been an almost automatic process, a spontaneous emergence. With Izanagi and Izanami, creation becomes an act of will, a mandate they must fulfill. Here, the true history of Japan begins to take shape. In a time when the earth was nothing but mud, the gods summoned the youngest and most vibrant couple, entrusting them with the mission of solidifying the world. To this end, they gave them the sacred spear Amena no Hoko, the spear of heaven, brilliant and filled with mystical light. Their first step was to descend the Amino Hokihashi, the floating bridge of heaven. Think of this bridge not as a physical structure, but as a divine rainbow, an ethereal path connecting Takamagara to the earth. From there, they gazed upon the primordial soup that would become the world. With the spear in his hands, Izanagi dipped it into the murky waters, gently swirled it, and as he lifted it, the drops that fell from its tip instantly solidified. The drops that fell from the spear coalesced and solidified, forming the first landmass, the first island of Japan. They named it Onigorishima, which means island that coagulates itself. It was the first place the gods were able to set foot and the beginning of their creative work. Onigorishima became their home and the center from which they would bring the entire Japanese archipelago to life. This act, as simple as falling raindrops, symbolizes how order emerges from chaos through creation. With the island established, they decided to make it their residence. In the center, they erected a celestial pillar, the Amino Mahashira, and around it, they built a palace, a Yashirodano. With a home established, they moved on to the next step, populating the earth. For this, they designed a courtship ritual. Izanagi and Izanami walked around the pillar in opposite directions, and upon meeting on the other side, they courted each other. Izanami spoke first, exclaiming how beautiful Izanagi was, and he responded by complimenting her beauty. They consummated their union, but the first birth was Hiriko, the leech child, a weak and deformed creature. Disappointed, they placed him in a reed basket and set him adrift at sea. The celestial gods explained that the mistake had been that the woman spoke first. In their culture, the man was supposed to initiate the ceremony. Following this advice, they repeated the ritual. This time, Izanagi spoke first upon meeting, describing Izanami's beauty, to which she responded in kind. Their union was blessed, and from it several islands were born: Awaji, Io Shikoku, Oki, Tsukushi, Kyushu, Iki, Tsushima, and Sato, the Great Dragon Island. The last and largest was Yamato Toyoakitsushima, known today as Honshu. These 8 islands, called Yashima or the 8 Great Islands, form the core of Japan. In addition, Izanagi and Izanami created many other smaller islands, with names that reflect their beauty and characteristics, such as the Island of the Gods and the Island of Rice. They not only created the land, but also filled it with nature deities, gods of the mountains, rivers, wind, and trees, ensuring that every corner of the archipelago had its own guardian spirit, its own kami. It was a monumental act of creation, a moment when the universe transformed from emptiness into a home teeming with life, divinity, and beauty, thanks to the love and obedience of this divine couple. After giving birth to the islands, Izanagi and Izanami's work was far from over. Their next task was to populate the world with deities representing every aspect of nature. Imagine the scene. The archipelago existed with mountains, valleys, and coastlines, but it lacked the spirits to inhabit it. The divine couple continued their work, and from their union countless kami were born. each personifying an element of the natural world. From Izanami's birth sprang the deities of nature. From her body came Yamatsumi, god of the mountains. From her womb, Kyanahime, goddess of grass and fertile earth. From her breath, Shinitsuhiko, god of the wind that whispers through the forests and whips across the sea. From her hands and feet emerged the deities of rivers and waterfalls, the spirits that make life flow through the earth. The kami of trees, grains, valleys, and plains were also born. It was a creative zenith, a symphony of births that filled the world with sacred power. The earth ceased to be merely a physical space. Now it had a soul in every corner. But at the climax of this creation, a birth changed everything forever. Izanami gave birth to the kami of fire, Kagutsuchi. It was a catastrophic birth. The fire consumed her and mortally wounded her. At that moment, creation ceased. Izanagi and Izanami, the perfect couple, the embodiment of life and order, saw their work cut short. Izanagi's lament was not only personal grief, but a cosmic upheaval. From his sorrow arose new deities. From water, kami were born to counteract fire, and from anger, deities of rock. His pain, deep and devastating, generated new life born from suffering. In an act of fury, Izanagi beheaded Kagutsuchi, the son who had caused his beloved's death. From each drop of blood that fell from the sword, new gods emerged. From the blood on the rocks were born deities of mountains and valleys, and from the hilt of his sword, the kami of thunder. From his own laments and sighs of pain were born the deities who personify sorrow and grief. This is a moment of profound duality. Kagutsuchi's birth not only brought fire, vital for civilization, but also death and suffering into the world. Izanami's death was not an accident, but an inevitable consequence of creation. By giving birth to fire, the spark of life, she also brought about destruction. With this, the era of pure creation ended, and the era of loss and separation began. For the first time, a god experienced death, something unknown until then. This act of grief and mourning paved the way for what followed. Izanagi's journey to the underworld, a journey that would change not only him but also define the relationship between life and death in the Japanese worldview. After Izanami's death, Izanagi's heart was filled with unbearable sorrow. He could not accept that his companion, his equal, his creator of worlds, had vanished forever. His love was so great that he decided to do something no god had ever attempted before: go in search of her. Armed with his sword, he descended to Yamanokuni, the underworld, the land of darkness. For the ancient Japanese, this place was not a punishment like the Christian hell, but a land of darkness and decay, a reflection of a world without sunlight. It was a world of shadows, where the dead lived in eternal night, filled with dangers and malevolent spirits. Izanagi followed the trail of his love to the boundary between life and death, heedless of the risks, driven only by the hope of seeing Izanami and persuading her to return to the world of the living. His journey echoes other universal myths, such as Orpheus descending to Hades for Eurydice, a testament to love that defies death. Upon reaching the entrance to Yomi, he encountered a dark barrier and crossed it without hesitation, driven by desperation. All that mattered to him was seeing Izanami, taking her hand, and leading her back to a world that still needed her. As he advanced, the landscape grew increasingly somber. The air heavy, the earth ashen, the silence oppressive. It was the complete opposite of the vibrant world he and Izanami had created. His sole purpose was to find her, an act of faith and love against the force of death. It wasn't about being a hero, but about being a lover who refused to accept the end. With every step he took in the darkness, Izanagi drew closer to a reunion that would forever change the fate of gods and mortals. After a long and desolate journey, he arrived at the gates of a grand palace, as gloomy as the rest of the underworld. With his heart in his hand, he called out to his beloved. From within, a voice echoed. It was Izanami. Izanagi's joy at hearing her was immense, but her voice sounded muffled, distant. She explained that it was too late, that she had already eaten the food of the underworld and that this bound her to that place forever. The food of Yomi was not food in the sense we know, but a concept, a pact that could not be broken. By consuming it, Izanami became an inhabitant of the world of the dead and could no longer return to the light. Izanagi, in despair, pleaded with her. He begged her to return, that the world they had created needed her, that he needed her. Despite her sorrow, Izanami hesitated. Her heart heavy with her beloved's pleas, she asked him to wait a moment, that she would go and speak with the gods of Yomi to ask permission for her to return. But she gave him a crucial warning. Do not look, please do not look inside. Izanagi waited at the palace entrance. Time seemed to stand still. The darkness grew denser, and the weight became unbearable. Minutes stretched into hours, and Izanagi's patience ran out. Izanami's promise was taking longer than he could bear, and his love, which had brought him this far, mingled with despair and doubt. His mind was filled with questions. Why was she taking so long? What was she hiding from him? Anguish overcame faith and trust. He could wait no longer. He took one of the prongs of his comb, lit it like a torch, and peered into the dark interior of the palace to see his beloved. What he saw was a horror that would scar him forever. The Izanami he remembered, radiant and full of life, had vanished. In her place, he saw a corrupted, putrid figure, covered in worms, her body decomposing, surrounded by the spirits of thunder, deformed and monstrous bodies. The reunion Izanagi had so longed for turned into a nightmare. The love that had brought him there transformed into fear and revulsion. The moment of their meeting, which should have been joyous, became the turning point that would define the rest of Japanese mythology. Izanagi's broken promise upon seeing Izanami unleashed a chase that forced him to flee the underworld and accept that, once life ends, there is no return. Like a flash, the light from Izanagi's thorn illuminated the dark palace of Yomi, and the image revealed before him was not the radiant Izanami he had loved, but a vision of terror. Her body in advanced decomposition, teeming with worms that writhed and devoured her flesh. Her face, once beautiful, was now a gaunt skull, and threads of rot dangled from her limbs. What horrified him even more were the 8 thunder demons, Yakuza, No, and Kazuchi, clinging to her body like grotesque parasites. They were the personification of decay, putrefaction itself. One clung to her head, another to her chest, and the rest were scattered throughout her body. These demons were not external beings, but had been born from Izanami's own decomposition. They were living proof that death had completely consumed her. The scream of horror that escaped Izanagi's lips echoed through the darkness of the underworld. His love, which had been the driving force behind his defiance of death, instantly transformed into revulsion. The sight of Izanami, so far removed from the goddess of life he remembered, was more than he could bear. There was no turning back. The promise he had made to her not to look at her had been broken, and with it, his beloved's last hope of returning to the world of the living. The fate of Izanagi and Izanami was sealed in that instant. The betrayal of Izanagi's curiosity and fear was the final straw. It was a moment of raw and painful truth. The reunion he had imagined as a romantic and joyful gathering turned into a nightmare. It wasn't just Izanami's appearance that frightened him, but the irreparable transformation she had undergone. He realized that what he had loved no longer existed and that she was trapped forever in decay. As soon as Izanami discovered that Izanagi had broken his promise and had seen her in her state of decomposition, a cry of rage and shame escaped her rotting lips. "Have you shamed me? Have you seen my decay?" he exclaimed, with a voice that was no longer that of the goddess of creation he had loved, but an echo from the underworld. Izanami's fury was immense. She felt betrayed by her beloved, and from her rage were born the Yomitsushikome, the Furies of Yomi. These creatures were hideous beings, witches and warriors of the underworld, whose sole purpose was to pursue and capture Izanagi for having desecrated the realm of the dead. Izanagi, filled with terror and revulsion, turned and fled. He didn't stop to think. He just ran. The Furies pursued him through the shadowy paths of Yomi, their screams echoing in the darkness. In his desperation, Izanagi threw his cap to the witches, and upon hitting the ground, it transformed into a bunch of wild grapes. The Furies, ravenous, stopped to eat the grapes, giving Izanagi a brief respite. But the truce was short-lived. After finishing their meal, the Furies resumed their pursuit, more ferocious than before. This time, Izanagi threw down the teeth of his comb, and upon touching the ground, they transformed into bamboo shoots. The witches, confused, paused to chew on the shoots, giving Izanagi another moment of respite. Finally, Izanagi reached Arasaka, the slope that marked the boundary between the land of the living and the underworld. There he found a peach tree, picked 3 of its fruits, threw them at his pursuers and shouted, "No shame!" The peaches, full of life and the essence of the earth, possessed a purifying power. Struck by them, the Furies immediately retreated, ashamed and purified by their touch. Since then, the peach has been considered a sacred fruit in Japan, with the power to repel evil and misfortune. Izanagi reached the entrance to Yomi, safe from his pursuers, but his beloved's fury was not yet over. At the entrance to Yomi, at the Arasaka that marked the boundary between life and death, Izanami's fury did not cease. She dispatched the 8 thunder demons, the Yakuza no Ikazuchi, and the Yomitsushikome, the Furies of Yomi, who had risen from her own decay to pursue her former husband. Izanagi managed to escape by hurling sacred peaches, but the final confrontation between the creators of the world was yet to come. Upon reaching the top of the slope that connects the world of the living and the dead, Izanagi took a great rock, so heavy that not even 1,000 men could have moved it, and placed it at the entrance to Yomi, sealing the path forever. Izanami was on the other side, trapped in her realm of darkness. Izanagi stood before the rock, and his beloved cried out to him from the other side, "If you do this, I will kill 1,000 people every day in your world." Izanami's threat was not a warning, but an ultimatum. Izanagi's heart broke completely. The love that had led him to the depths of death had been extinguished, replaced by the pain of betrayal and revulsion. With a trembling voice, he replied, "If you kill 1,000 people every day, I will cause 1,500 to be born every day." That moment was the turning point, the divorce not only of husband and wife, but of life and death. The rock that Izanagi placed between the 2 worlds is called Shigeshi no Kami, the Great Rock of Return. From that instant, Izanami became Izanami no Mikoto, the goddess of the dead, condemned to reign in darkness. And Izanagi's promise was not only a response to the threat, but the creation of the cycle of life. From then on, birth and death became a constant, an uninterrupted cycle in the world. Death was no longer just an anomaly, but a fundamental part of existence. The myth of Izanagi and Izanami explains not only the creation of Japan, but also the existence of death in the world. It tells us that death is not a punishment, but a natural consequence of life. That separation is painful, but inevitable. And, in the same way that Izanagi's grief gave birth to the deities of mourning, his mourning and his act of sealing Izanami in the underworld became an act of creation, ensuring that for every life lost, more will be born to continue the cycle of existence. Once Izanagi had sealed Izanami in the underworld, his body and soul were filled with the filth and corruption of Yama-no-Kuni, the land of darkness. For a god as pure as he, having been in a place of decay was a desecration he could not ignore. He needed to purify himself, to rid himself of the evil he had accumulated on his journey. Izanagi went to a river near a place called Hyuga and stripped naked. Before entering the water, he threw his belongings into the water, and upon touching the ground, they transformed into new deities. The staff he had carried became the god of the road. His belt became the god of travel, and his clothes the gods of clothing. Each object he abandoned represented a part of his life he was leaving behind. He plunged into the river and began the purification ritual known as misogi. It was an act of total renewal, a sacred bath to cleanse not only his body but also his spirit. And it was at this moment, as he washed away the filth of the underworld, that the greatest miracle in Japanese mythology occurred. As he washed his left eye, the sun goddess Amaterasu Mikami was born. As he washed his right eye, the moon god Tsukuyomi no Mikoto was born. And as he washed his nose, from it sprang the god of storms and oceans, Susanoo no Mikoto. The three gods were born without the participation of a mother. They were an act of pure creation, a birth from Izanagi's purification. That is why they are known as the three noble children. Upon seeing his children, Izanagi felt profound joy and immense pride. He entrusted the universe to them to rule. He gave Amaterasu the necklace of jewels, the Magatama, and placed her in charge of the celestial realm, Takamagara. He placed Tsukuyomi in charge of the realm of the night, the world of the moon, and Susanoo in charge of the seas. The birth of these three gods was not only the creation of important deities but also the consolidation of the celestial pantheon, with a clear ruler. But, as we shall see, this order would not last forever. At that very moment, while Izanagi was washing, something extraordinary occurred. As he rinsed his left eye, a deity of unparalleled beauty and splendor emerged. She was a goddess, and her entire body radiated such a brilliant light that heaven and earth were instantly illuminated. She was Amaterasu Mikami, the great and majestic sun goddess. Her birth was a momentous event. She was the personification of light, heat, and life itself. If Japanese mythology is about a universe created through light and darkness, Amaterasu was living proof of the supremacy of light. Her birth from Izanagi's left eye is not a coincidence. In many cultures, the right side is associated with the future and light, while the left side is linked to the past and darkness. Amaterasu's birth from the left eye could suggest that, despite Izanagi's dark past in the underworld, his suffering, and his purification, a bright future could be born from the past. Upon seeing her, Izanagi was filled with joy and pride. He considered her the noblest of his three children, the most important. Her birth represented a new beginning, a hope after the pain and despair he had experienced. Izanagi did not hesitate to bestow upon her the jeweled necklace, known as the Magatama, and placed her in charge of the most important realm of all, Takamagara, the high and vast heaven. With her birth, the world had a sun, and like the sun in the sky, Amaterasu would become the center of the Shinto pantheon, the source of life and order. She would not only be a goddess, but the direct ancestor of the imperial line of Japan. Her light, her power, and her legacy would continue to shine throughout the centuries, shaping the destiny of an entire nation. Still immersed in his purification ritual, Izanagi continued his cleansing. In the same act that gave life to Amaterasu, as he rinsed his right eye, a second child was born to him. He was Tsukuyomi no Mikoto, the god of the moon. Tsukuyomi's birth was an event of mystery and tranquility, the exact opposite of the splendor and brilliance radiated by his sister. If Amaterasu was the light of day, Tsukuyomi was the reflection of night, the calm that follows the activity of the sun. His birth from the right eye, which is associated with light and reason, could be a metaphor for the serenity and wisdom found in the night. Upon witnessing Tsukuyomi's birth, Izanagi, in his pride, assigned him dominion over the night. He was given the task of ruling the realm of darkness and the tides. Unlike other lunar deities in other mythologies, Tsukuyomi is an enigmatic and, in many ways, solitary figure. He is not known for having a retinue of followers or for interfering in human affairs. His existence is a subtle hint that darkness is not inherently evil, but rather a vital part of the cycle of life, a period of rest and introspection. Tsukuyomi's relationship with his siblings, especially Amaterasu, is crucial to understanding Japanese mythology. The two, the moon and the sun, ruled together, one by day and the other by night, maintaining the balance of the universe. But, as we will see, this balance will later be broken in a conflict that will separate them forever. However, at the moment of his birth, Tsukuyomi represented perfect duality. The calm of the night to complement the energy of the day, the moon to reflect the sunlight, and his existence was further proof of the creative power that arose from Izanagi's tragedy and pain. After giving birth to the sun and the moon, Izanagi's purification ritual continued. As he rinsed his nose, the last of his three noble children was born. Susanoo no Mikoto, the god of storms, the sea, and the winds. Susanoo's birth was not as peaceful as that of his siblings. He was a deity brimming with untamed energy and a wild nature, a reflection of the elements he would rule. His nose, unlike his siblings' eyes, suggested a connection to breath, a symbol of life and brute force. He was a god of passion and destruction, a whirlwind of emotions that could not be easily contained. Seeing his third child, Izanagi was satisfied with his work. He had created a divine pantheon of rulers for the three realms of the universe: the sky for Amaterasu, the night for Tsukuyomi, and the oceans for Susanoo. However, while his siblings accepted their fates with obedience, Susanoo wept and lamented with such profound sorrow that it caused trees to wither and mountains to dry up. His tears created rivers and valleys, and his grief was so immense that it affected the entire world. Izanagi, confused and angry, asked him why he was crying, since he had given him a kingdom as large as those of his brothers. Susanoo, between sobs, replied that what he really wanted was to go to the kingdom of his mother, Izanami, in Yamano-kuni. Izanagi, weary and furious at his son's disobedience, banished him from the heavens. Susanoo's birth marked the first descent within the divine pantheon. Unlike his siblings, who represented order and balance, Susanoo was chaos, the uncontrollable force of nature. He was a misunderstood god, whose destiny would lead him on a journey of redemption, a journey that would transform him from an arrogant and destructive deity into a legendary hero. His story, as we shall see, is one of the most fascinating in Japanese mythology. It is a clear example that great heroes often emerge from inner conflict and pain. And so, the divine pantheon, which seemed perfect at its inception, already had a crack that would grow wider over time. Banished by his father, Izanagi, Susanoo decided to bid farewell to his sister, the great sun goddess Amaterasu, in the celestial realm of Takamagara. However, his arrival was not peaceful. Susanoo's erratic and destructive nature was well known, and Amaterasu, seeing him approach, suspected his intentions. With a heart full of doubt, Amaterasu asked her brother the true reason for his visit. Susanoo, in an attempt to prove his intentions were pure, challenged her to a test of loyalty. He proposed a birth contest. Whoever produced the noblest deities from the other sword would be the winner. Amaterasu accepted. Susanoo handed her his sword, and she broke it into 3 pieces. As she chewed and spat them out, 3 goddesses of beauty and purity emerged. Then it was Amaterasu's turn. Susanoo took his sister's jeweled necklace, broke it into pieces, chewed it, and spat it out. From his breath were born 5 gods, all male and filled with vigorous energy. Even though the 5 male gods were born from an object belonging to Amaterasu, Susanoo declared himself the victor, since the gods were male and therefore nobler. His victory, however, was not acknowledged, which enraged the storm god. Filled with rage, Susanoo indulged in mischief. He began to wreak havoc in Takamagara. He destroyed the celestial rice paddies, which were the foundation of the god's sustenance, and filled the palace with excrement, defiling the home of his brethren. But the worst of all his mischief occurred in the place where the gods gathered to weave the sacred garments. Susanoo, in an act of uncontrolled rage, skinned a horse and threw its rotting carcass onto the celestial loom. The act was so terrible and so profane that one of the weavers was so terrified that she injured herself with her own tool and died. The chaos Susanoo unleashed was intolerable to the gods. His actions were not mere pranks, but a direct attack on the order of Takamagara. And Amaterasu, seeing the chaos her brother had unleashed, was filled with anger and grief. In an act of utter disappointment, she made a decision that would plunge the world into terrifying darkness. Enraged by his defeat in the birth test, Susanoo set out to unleash his fury upon Takamagara, the high and vast heaven. His first target was something fundamental to the existence of the gods: the celestial rice paddies. In an act of utter disregard for order, Susanoo destroyed the dikes and canals of the rice paddies, flooding and ruining the crops that nourished the gods. Rice was not just food. It was a symbol of life, prosperity, and hard work. By destroying the fields, Susanoo was not merely misbehaving. He was attacking the very foundation of celestial society. His act was a clear challenge to the authority of his sister Amaterasu, who was considered the chief protector of the rice paddies. But his misbehavior did not stop there. A second act of desecration, even worse than the first, was yet to come. In the great weaving hall, where the goddesses wove the sacred garments of the gods, Susanoo committed his worst crime. He skinned a horse, an animal considered sacred, and threw its rotting carcass onto the loom, soiling the fabric and terrifying the weavers. The fear was so great that one of the goddesses was so frightened that she injured herself with her loom's shuttle and died. This act, in particular, was unforgivable. The weaver's death was a breaking point. Susanoo's chaos was not only destructive, but now deadly. His actions were not mere pranks of an immature god. They were a rebellion against civilization, order, and life itself. Amaterasu, seeing the desecration of her home and the pain her brother had caused, felt deeply ashamed and hurt. The disappointment and rage she felt at her brother's actions led her to make a decision that would have catastrophic consequences for the entire world. She, the goddess of light, could no longer tolerate so much darkness. After witnessing the destruction of her rice paddies and the desecration of the celestial loom by her brother Susanoo, Amaterasu, the sun goddess, was overwhelmed with shame and sorrow. She could not bear the evil her own brother had unleashed. In an act of profound disappointment, she made a drastic decision that would change the fate of the universe. She would withdraw from the world. She ventured into Ōkuninushi, the cave of the celestial rock. With immense strength, she moved the gigantic rock that served as its entrance and sealed it, plunging the world into total darkness. Without the sun, there was no light. Takamagara, the high and vast sky, and the earth became a cold, gloomy, and chaotic place. The fields rotted, the crops withered, and the kami gods lost their power. The world became a dangerous place, where evil spirits, the Yakuza no Kami, emerged from their hiding places and roamed freely. The gods were plunged into deep despair, for without Amaterasu's light, their very existence was threatened. Amaterasu's withdrawal was not an act of malice, but of profound sorrow. Her confinement was a lament, a protest against the chaos and evil that had invaded her peaceful realm. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest light is the one that is extinguished, and that its absence is more powerful than its presence. And so, the world, once vibrant and full of life, became a place of darkness, a stage for the gods' desperate attempt to return light to the universe. In a world submerged in darkness, the desperation of the gods of Takamagara was palpable. They gathered on the riverbed to devise a plan that could lure Amaterasu out of the cave. The chaos and endless night had created an environment conducive to evil, and the kami knew that without sunlight, the universe could not survive. After much deliberation, they decided to try an unusual strategy. Instead of pleading with her to come out, they decided to create an event so strange and noisy that her curiosity would outweigh her anger. The gods set to work. Omoikane, the god of wisdom, devised the plan. Ishikoridan forged a mirror, the Yata no Kagami, which shone with the light of a gem, and placed it on a sakiki tree, facing the cave entrance. Around the tree, Tamano Yano Mikoto hung a necklace of jewels, the Yasakani no Magatama, to attract the goddess's gaze. But the heart of the plan lay with one goddess in particular, Aim no Yuzum, the goddess of dawn and fertility. With the music of the gods playing at full volume, Aim no Yuzum climbed onto an overturned jar and began to dance. Her dance was wild and frenzied. As her dance grew more intense, she began to undress. Her passionate dance and her laughter, which echoed throughout Takamagara, made all the gods watching the spectacle roar with laughter. The commotion and laughter outside the cave reached Amaterasu's ears. Intrigued and frowning, she asked, "Why are the gods laughing and celebrating when I, the sun goddess, have hidden myself from the world and all is in darkness?" A god replied slyly, "We are celebrating because we have a goddess even more beautiful and radiant than you, and she has emerged from the cave." Amaterasu's curiosity was stronger than her sorrow. She opened the cave door just a crack to see who it was. At that moment, Aim no Yuzume showed her the Yata no Kagami, the mirror they had hung in the tree. The mirror reflected Amaterasu's face, and upon seeing it, the goddess was captivated by her own beauty and radiance. While she was distracted by her reflection, the god of strength, Aim no Tajikareo, stood behind the rock at the cave entrance and pushed it aside, freeing her forever. With Amaterasu out of the cave, light returned to the world. The sun shone once more, and order was restored to the universe. The lesson of this myth is powerful. Light always prevails over darkness, even if it hides for a time. It also teaches us that sometimes the most effective way to resolve a conflict is not with force, but with ingenuity, curiosity, and joy. And the three objects used to summon Amaterasu, the Yata no Kagami mirror, the Yasukani no Magatama jewel necklace, and the Kusanagi no Tsurugi sword, which will appear later, became the three sacred treasures of Japan, symbols of the imperial legitimacy of the line of emperors. The god Amino Tajikareo moved the rock at the cave entrance, freeing Amaterasu forever. As she emerged, the entire world was filled with light once more. The crops revived, and the chaos that had reigned vanished. The gods, relieved and joyful, convinced her never to hide again, sealing their promise that sunlight would always shine upon the earth. With order restored, the gods gathered in assembly to judge Susanoo, the one responsible for the darkness. The court of the celestial gods found him guilty of his crimes against his sister and the Takamagara. His punishment was severe. He was banished from the celestial realm, stripped of all his divine powers and possessions, as if he were immortal. Like a wanderer, he was forced to descend to earth and live among the humans he had neglected with his wickedness. Susanoo's expulsion was not only a punishment but also a lesson in humility. The arrogant and egocentric storm god was forced to face the consequences of his actions. His banishment was a turning point. He was no longer a powerful god who could do as he pleased, but a wandering being in a world he did not yet know. His descent to earth, in the region of Izumo, marked the beginning of a new stage in his life. In an ironic twist, the god who brought chaos to the heavens now had the opportunity to redeem himself in the world of humans. And it is on earth that Susanoo would ultimately find his purpose, his true identity, and his final destiny. After his humiliating banishment from Takamagara, Susanoo, the storm god, wandered the human world. His descent was an act of punishment, but also an opportunity for redemption. He fell in a region known as Izumo, in western Japan, a land that, at that time, was filled with natural beauty, but also terror. Susanoo, now stripped of his celestial arrogance, wandered the countryside. His erratic nature had led him to a place where chaos and destruction reigned. But this time, he was not the one who had caused it. He came across an old man and an old woman weeping inconsolably, with a curiosity he had not shown before. He asked them why they were crying. The old man, who introduced himself as a Shinasuchi, the old man who strokes feet, and his wife, Tenasuchi, the old woman who strokes hands, told him their tragic story. They had 8 daughters, but every year an 8-headed dragon, Yamata no Orochi, descended from the mountains to devour one of them. They had already lost 7 of their daughters. And now the dragon came for the last one, Kushinadaheim, the princess of the comb. Her beauty was so great that not even death could leave her in peace. The old man and woman, filled with grief, told him that they could do nothing, that they were powerless against the monster. Upon hearing the story, a spark ignited within Susanoo. For the first time in his life, he felt compassion. The god who had sown chaos in the heavens now had the opportunity to save humanity from an even greater evil. His arrogance transformed into a desire to be a hero. And so, in the land of Izumo, an exiled, erratic, and wild god found himself on a mission that would redeem him and transform him into one of the most revered figures in Japanese mythology. After being banished, Susanoo wandered through the region of Izumo when, on the banks of a river, he came across a heartbreaking scene. An old man and woman, with tears in their eyes, embraced their daughter, the comb princess, Kushinadaheim. Susanoo's heart, so prone to destruction, was moved by the sight of this family's grief. He approached and, with a voice no longer arrogant, asked them why they were so sad. The old man, a Shinatsuchi, told him the tragic story of Yamata no Orochi, the monstrous 8-headed dragon. Every year, the old man said, his voice breaking with grief, "It descends from the mountains to devour one of our daughters. It has already taken 7, and now it comes for the 8th, our beloved Kushinahaim." The old man's description of the dragon was terrifying. The Yamata no Orochi was a monster with 8 heads and 8 tails, the size of 8 hills, and its eyes were a brilliant red like winter cherries. Its body was covered in moss and trees, and the valleys and hills trembled in its wake. Its arrival heralded certain death and utter destruction. Upon hearing the story, Susanoo realized that it wasn't just the life of a princess that was at stake, but the fate of the entire region. His arrogance as a celestial god had transformed into a profound sense of responsibility. He, who had caused so much pain to his sister and the gods, now had the opportunity to save humanity from the very evil he had embodied. Fate had placed before him an opportunity for redemption, to prove he was more than just an erratic and savage god. And so, the god who had once sown chaos in the heavens now prepared to face chaos on earth. Faced with the old man's terror and the imminent arrival of Yamata no Orochi, the banished god, Susanoo, displayed surprising cunning. He, who had been the personification of chaos, now behaved like a strategist. He told the old man and his wife that he had a plan to defeat the dragon. He instructed the family to build a fence with 8 gates. At each gate, he directed them to place a huge barrel filled with sake, the traditional Japanese alcoholic beverage. But not just any sake, a highly potent, fermented drink that would lure the dragon. Susanoo's plan was simple. The dragon would come for the princess, but instead of finding her, it would find 8 barrels filled with irresistible sake. The old man, having nothing to lose, trusted Susanoo and followed his instructions. They worked together to build the fence, open the gates, and place the barrels, each filled to the brim with sake. Just in time, the Yamata no Orochi appeared. Its body was so vast it covered the valley, and its 8 heads, each with a blood-red eye, advanced with a thirst for destruction. The dragon crawled toward the place where it knew it would find the princess, and upon arriving, it saw the 8 sake barrels. The beast, filled with greed and an insatiable thirst, plunged each of its 8 heads into a barrel and began to drink. The sake was so potent that the dragon quickly became intoxicated. In a state of complete drunkenness, its heads grew heavy, its movements slowed, and finally, it collapsed into a deep sleep. Susanoo's cunning had worked. The storm god didn't need to use brute force, but rather his wit, demonstrating his maturity. The dragon, which hadn't been defeated by brute force, was overcome by its own gluttony, and with the dragon asleep, Susanoo prepared for the final confrontation. With Yamata no Orochi fast asleep from drunkenness, Susanoo approached the monster. This was his moment, his chance to prove that, despite having been responsible for the chaos in the heavens, he could be a hero on earth. The storm god drew his sword, Tatsuka no Tsurugi, and prepared for the final confrontation. One by one, he decapitated the dragon's 8 heads. The monster's blood flowed in a torrent that stained the river a dark red, a macabre reflection of the dragon's evil. The ground trembled under the dragon's immense mass as Susanoo continued his task. Finally, only the 8 tails remained. Susanoo, in his haste, cut off the first 7 without finding anything unusual. But as he cut the 8th, his sword struck something solid. Intrigued, Susanoo split the last tail in 2 and, to his surprise, found a magnificent sword inside. It was no ordinary sword. It was Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the blade of the cutting grass, one of the 3 imperial jewels of Japan. It was a sword so beautiful and so expertly crafted that it was impossible for a human to have created it. At that moment, Susanoo realized that this sword was a gift from the gods, a sign that they had forgiven him and that his deeds had been noble. The sword was a symbol of his redemption. The god who had once used his power for destruction now used it to save a family and bring peace to an entire region. With the dragon defeated, Susanoo prepared for the next step of his journey, his return to the world of the gods and his reconciliation with his sister, Amaterasu. With Yamata no Orochi finally defeated and Kusanagi no Tsurugi in his possession, Susanoo was no longer the erratic and arrogant god who had been banished. The experience of saving a human family and finding such a sacred treasure had transformed him. He felt a deep desire to mend his relationship with his sister, Amaterasu, the sun goddess, whom he had shamed and forced into hiding, plunging the world into darkness. He took the newly discovered sword and, in an act of humility and repentance, decided to offer it to his sister as a gift. He ascended once more to Takamagara, the high and vast heaven, but this time not in anger, but with profound reverence. He prostrated himself before Amaterasu and presented her with the sword, which shone with a light never before seen. It was a weapon forged not in a furnace, but in the belly of a dragon, a sword that had vanquished evil and symbolized the victory of good over chaos. Amaterasu, seeing her brother's gesture, was deeply moved. The sword was not just a gift. It was an apology, proof that Susanoo had matured and found virtue. The sword's light was so pure that it dispelled any shadow of doubt she might have had. At that moment, reconciliation became inevitable. Amaterasu accepted the sword, acknowledging her brother's heroism and forgiving his past. The Kusanagi no Tsurugi became the third sacred treasure of Japan, alongside the Yata no Kagami mirror and the Yasukani no Magatama jewel necklace. The sword is a symbol of courage, strength, and reconciliation. Amaterasu's act of forgiving Susanoo and accepting his offering is a pivotal moment in Japanese mythology. The relationship between the siblings, so conflicted at first, became an example of harmony and order. The god of chaos and the god of light were reconciled, sealing the fate of a nation. Susanoo, no longer an exiled god, married Kushina Dehime, the princess he had saved, and became the ruler of Izumo, the region where he found his redemption. And his descendants, throughout the generations, would continue the line of royalty on earth, while the line of Amaterasu would rule the heavens. Now that the gods of heaven had consolidated their power, it was time to descend to earth to meet the protagonists of the mortal world. In the region of Izumo, the land where Susanoo found his redemption, lived one of his descendants, Ōkuninushi, the great lord of the land. Unlike most gods who had a heroic birth, Ōkuninushi had to earn his title through patience, kindness, and suffering. His most famous story is that of the Rabbit of Inaba. Ōkuninushi had 80 brothers, all of them arrogant and cruel. One day, they all decided to travel to the region of Inaba to woo a princess. On their journey, they found a white rabbit lying on the beach, its skin raw and bleeding. The older brothers, seeing it, instead of helping, laughed and cruelly told it, "If you want your pain to ease, bathe in the sea and then dry yourself in the wind on a mountaintop." The rabbit, following their advice, felt excruciating pain, as the salt water and wind caused its skin to harden and crack, leaving it even more miserable. Just after Ōkuninushi arrived, seeing the rabbit suffering, he asked what had happened. The rabbit told him that it had tricked some sharks into helping it cross the sea, but in the end, one of them caught it and ripped off its skin. In an act of pure compassion, Ōkuninushi, the only one of his brothers who cared for the animal, gave it different advice. He told the rabbit to bathe in the fresh water of a river, cover himself in tadora reed pollen, and lie down on it so his skin would heal. The rabbit followed Ōkuninushi's advice, and his skin was completely healed. Grateful, the rabbit revealed his true identity. He was a god, and as a reward for his kindness, he prophesied to Ōkuninushi that he would be the one to marry the princess and become the true ruler of the land, not his cruel brothers. This seemingly simple story is fundamental to understanding Ōkunинushi's character. Unlike other heroes who earn their status through strength or cunning, he earned it through compassion and patience. His innate kindness and humility made him more suited to rule than his brothers, whose judgment had been clouded by cruelty. And the Inaba rabbit's prophecy was merely the beginning of a series of trials that Ōkuninushi would have to overcome. After the prophecy of the rabbit of Inaba, Ōkunинushi's luck took a turn for the worse. The 80 brothers, consumed by jealousy of his kindness and the prophecy that he would marry the princess, decided they had to eliminate him. Their envy was so great that they would stop at nothing to get rid of him and secure power for themselves. Although Japanese mythology has many heroes, Ōkuninushi's story is unique because of the way he suffers for his kindness. The first assassination attempt was a ruse. The brothers, with false promises of friendship, lured him to a mountain. They told him that a wild boar would come down the mountain and that if he didn't stop it, disaster would strike. They promised to help him. Naively, Ōkuninushi stepped into the boar's path. But what his brothers didn't tell him was that the boar coming down the hill was a red-hot rock they themselves had prepared. The rock rolled down the mountain and burned him to death. Upon learning what had happened, Ōkuninushi's mother, Sashikuni Wakeheim, was devastated. She ascended to the heavens and begged Kamimazubi, one of the creation deities, to return her son to her. Moved by her grief, Kamimazubi sent 2 of his goddesses, Kisagaiheim and Umuaheim, to revive him. Kisagaiheim used a clam shell to scrape away Ōkuninushi's burnt remains, while Umuaheim used an oyster shell to make a paste with which she reconstructed him and brought him back to life. But the brothers did not give up. In a second attempt, they took him to a tree and told him that if he climbed it, he could avoid an evil spirit. In an act of naivete, Ōkuninushi climbed the tree, and his brothers shot him with a wooden arrow, killing him again. Once again, his mother had to ask the gods for help. Finally, his mother gave him one last warning: run from them, or they will kill you forever. She told him to hide in the world of his father, Susanoo. Ōkuninushi, tired of his brother's attempts, took her advice and embarked on a journey to the land of Yomi. This journey, however, was not for death, but for life. It was a journey of escape to find a place where he could be himself. The story of Ōkuninushi teaches us that sometimes the greatest strength is not power, but perseverance, and that kindness, though it may be wounded, always prevails. If you're listening to me at this point in the video, I hope you're already subscribed to the channel. This is Sleepy History, and my wish is to have a huge community of people who love the Knights, and to share the knowledge of thousands of people from all over the world, connected by that intrinsic desire to learn more, to get to know oneself better, and to have a better life. I always say it, and I'll say it again. Knowing history is fundamental to not repeating the mistakes of the past. That's why I want you to take a few seconds to subscribe and share this video with your knowledge-obsessed friend. And even better if your generous spirit inspires you to give a huge thank you to this humble servant. In any case, my gratitude, just for the simple fact of sharing this moment, is boundless. Now then, let's continue with the story. Upon arriving in his father Susanoo's world, Yomi, Ōkuninushi found himself in a land filled with spirits, gods, and challenges. It wasn't a journey to the underworld of death, but a place of testing where a young god would face his destiny. One of the first things he encountered was a small creature, a dwarf god, who arrived in a boat made from a plant pod. His name was Sukuna, and his arrival in Ōkuninushi's life was crucial. Sukuna was the son of a creation deity and a god of medicine, healing, and agriculture. Despite his small stature, he possessed immense wisdom. When the dwarf god and Ōkuninushi met, they became instant friends. The two joined forces and together dedicated themselves to a grand project, the consolidation of the Izumo region. While Ōkuninushi's 80 brothers had been trying to kill him, he and Sukuna dedicated themselves to doing good. They traveled the land teaching humans agriculture, how to cure diseases, and how to build shrines for the gods. Together, they laid the foundations of civilization and order in a region that had been on the brink of chaos. The duo of gods was a perfect match. Ōkuninushi, with his kindness and patience, and Sukuna, with his wit and knowledge. Their friendship was a cornerstone of mythology, and together they consolidated the region's power. Their work was not only about power but also about creation and prosperity. They were not dedicated to war, but to agriculture, medicine, and the art of living. However, their friendship did not last forever. After many years of work, Sukuna suddenly departed, climbing a millet stalk to the sky. His friend's departure left Ōkuninushi in a deep state of sorrow. But this time, his grief did not kill him. Instead, it made him stronger. From his sorrow, a new deity, Mononoke, appeared and told him that he, Ōkuninushi, was now the sole lord of the land, the king of Izumo. And so, the god who had been a wanderer, who had survived 80 assassination attempts, finally became the ruler of his own kingdom, a kingdom he built with the help of a friend and through the sheer force of his kindness and perseverance. After consolidating his power as Ōkuninushi, the great lord of the land, and with the departure of his friend and companion Sukuna, the god's next step was to honor the heavens and establish a center of worship for his rule. To this end, he embarked on the construction of a magnificent shrine. This would not be a mere temple, but a monumental structure that would reflect the power and virtue of his reign. The shrine was built in the region of Izumo, the land he and Sukuna had civilized. But its construction had an even deeper purpose. It was a gift to Amaterasu, the sun goddess, and to all the gods of Takamagara. The shrine was a physical manifestation of his allegiance to the celestial pantheon, an acknowledgement that, although he ruled the earth, the heavens were the source of his power. The construction of the shrine was a task of epic proportions. According to legend, the structure was so tall that its roof could be seen from the realm of the gods. The pillars that supported it were as thick as the trunks of ancient trees. It was a feat of architecture and engineering, but also an act of faith. The shrine was proof that Ōkuninushi, despite having suffered betrayal and envy, remained a humble being who did not forget those above. Today, Izumo Taisha, or the Grand Shrine of Izumo, still exists and is one of Japan's oldest and most important shrines. Although the current structure is not the original one from the legend, archaeologists have found evidence that the original construction was colossal, with pillars measuring nearly a meter in diameter. This suggests that the legend was not just a tale, but a story based on a real structure. The shrine is the center of Ōkuninushi worship, and every year, in the 10th month of the lunar calendar, it is believed that all of Japan's gods gather at Izumo to celebrate and make decisions about the nation's fate. Izumo Taisha is not just a temple. It is a symbol of Ōkuninushi's story, his perseverance, his kindness, and his reconciliation with the heavens. The construction of the shrine not only provided a home for the gods, but also solidified Ōkunинushi's status as ruler of the land, a king who earned his crown not through force, but through kindness and hard work. With Ōkuninushi reigning over Izumo and the Izumo Taisha as the center of worship, the human world seemed to be in order. However, in Takamagara, the realm of the gods, there was growing concern. Amaterasu, the sun goddess, and the other celestial deities feared that Ōkunинushi's power would become too great and that he might one day challenge their authority. Although Ōkuninushi had proven himself to be a just and humble ruler, he was not a direct descendant of Amaterasu, and for the celestial gods, this was a problem. They believed that the true ruler of Japan should be of their own lineage, a descendant of the sun itself. In a grand assembly, the celestial gods made a decision. The land of Japan should be ruled by their own kind, not by a descendant of Susanoo. To this end, they would send a representative to ask Ōkuninushi to cede the kingdom to a heavenly god. This event, known as Kuniusuri, or the transfer of the kingdom, became one of the most important moments in Japanese mythology. The first messenger sent was Amenohoji, one of Amaterasu's sons. However, instead of fulfilling his mission, he befriended Ōkuninushi and joined his government without returning to heaven. The second messenger, Amino Wakahiko, also failed, seduced by earthly life and the beauty of Ōkunинushi's daughter, whom he married. Frustrated and angered, the celestial gods realized they could not trust just any messenger. They needed someone strong, loyal, and not easily swayed by promises of power. Their plan had to be simple yet decisive, to bring Ōkuninushi into submission, preferably through diplomacy rather than war. However, with the first attempts failing, the fate of Earth's government hung in the balance. The transfer of the kingdom would not be easy, and the story of how it was carried out is a lesson in negotiation, strength, and power. The assembly of heavenly gods had decreed that the land of Japan should be ruled by a descendant of Amaterasu, the sun goddess. But imposing this divine will on the earthly world proved no simple task. Messengers sent to ask Ōkuninushi to relinquish his kingdom failed one after another. The first messenger, Amenohoji, received the clear mission of convincing Ōkuninushi. However, captivated by the lord of the land's rule and charisma, he decided to stay. He integrated himself into earthly life, completely forgetting his divine mandate and becoming a devoted follower of Ōkuninushi. After 3 years without news, the gods realized he had failed. The second messenger, Amino Hakahiko, received a sacred bow and arrows for protection on his mission. Upon arriving on Earth, he was dazzled by the beauty of Shida Ōkunинushi's daughter. Instead of trying to persuade Ōkuninushi, he fell deeply in love with her, married her, and began ruling alongside his father-in-law. The celestial gods, noticing his delay, sent a sacred pheasant to question him. Amino Hakahiko, filled with rage, shot an arrow at the pheasant, which flew into the sky and fell at the feet of the celestial assembly. Amaterasu, seeing the blood-stained arrow, understood that the messenger had betrayed his mission. The arrow returned to its owner and killed him, demonstrating the failure of the second attempt. These failures taught the celestial gods a vital lesson. The earthly world was full of temptations and could corrupt even deities. The transfer of the realm would not be achieved by force, but through wisdom, patience, and negotiation. For the final, crucial, and decisive mission, the gods sent Takamikazuchi no Mikoto, the god of thunder and swords, accompanied by Futsunushi no Mikoto, the god of swords. They were not mere emissaries, but divine warriors, making it clear that the heavens were prepared to use force if diplomacy failed. Instead of going to the land of Izumo, Takamikazuchi stood on the tip of a sword and addressed Ōkuninushi. The Takamagara has decreed that this land must be ruled by a descendant of our lineage. What do you say to this? He asked. Ōkuninushi, aware of the god's power, did not answer immediately and summoned his sons. Koto Shiranushi no Mikoto, the god of words, accepted the heaven's command, left his boat in the water, and withdrew. Take Minakata no Mikoto, the god of strength, challenged Takamikazuchi to a duel, confident of victory. The battle was swift and decisive. Takamikazuchi transformed Take Minakata's hand into a block of ice and then into a bamboo branch. Defeated, Take Minakata fled while Takamikazuchi pursued him. Ōkuninushi understood that the only option was to relinquish the throne. He told the gods that if they built a shrine as grand and glorious as his palace, and his children could rule in peace, he would retire and live in that shrine. The pact was sealed, and Ōkuninushi surrendered the kingdom to the celestial gods, becoming the chief deity of Izumo Taisha, the shrine he himself had built. This act, known as Kuniuzuri, was not a defeat, but a victory of wisdom over force. With humility and understanding, Ōkuninushi secured a place in the divine pantheon and guaranteed a future of peace between heaven and earth, ruling over spirits and souls from his shrine. With the transfer complete, the celestial gods prepared for a new chapter. Ōkuninushi had peacefully ceded his kingdom to the lineage of Amaterasu. Now it was time for the true ruler, a descendant of the goddess, to descend from the heavens. This event, known as Tenzen-kuren, or the descent of the celestial grandson, marks the beginning of the Japanese imperial line. The chosen one was Ninigi no Mikoto, grandson of Amaterasu, who was entrusted with the mission of descending to earth and ruling it, establishing a lasting government. To ensure his legitimacy, Amaterasu gave him 3 sacred treasures that had been used in the past: the Yata no Kagami, a sacred mirror, the Yasukani no Magatama, a sacred jewel necklace, and the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the sword that Susanoo had found in the dragon and offered to Amaterasu. With these 3 objects, Ninigi had the authority and power to rule. Ninigi, accompanied by a retinue of gods, descended from the heavens. His landing was not just anywhere, but on the summit of Mount Takachio on the island of Kyushu. This mist-shrouded mountain was a mystical place, a meeting point between heaven and earth. His descent was a momentous event, an act that sealed the relationship between gods and humans. Mount Takachio became a sacred place, proof that the Emperor of Japan was not merely a human leader, but a direct descendant of the gods. Once he set foot on the mountain's summit, Ninigi prepared to rule Mount Takachio, its peak almost always hidden by clouds. It is a symbol of the Japanese imperial line, the royalty that descends from the heavens but lives on earth. And so, with Ninigi's descent, the foundations were laid for a government that would be not only political, but also divine. Before Ninigi descended from heaven to earth, his grandmother, Amaterasu, gave him an order and a treasure that would guarantee his legitimacy as ruler. The order was simple yet powerful. You will rule the land of Japan, and your reign will be eternal as long as heaven and earth. And the treasure he gave him consisted of 3 sacred objects that would be the symbols of his power and the authority of his descendants. These objects are the 3 Imperial Regalia of Japan, Osanshu no Jinji, which are still part of the emperor's coronation ceremony today. The first treasure was the Yata no Kagami mirror. This was no ordinary mirror, but an object that reflected the very essence of Amaterasu. When the goddess had hidden in the cave, it was the reflection of her own light in the mirror that drew her out. For this reason, the mirror became a symbol of wisdom, since seeing one's own reflection is an act of self-knowledge, a way of understanding one's own essence and divinity. For Japanese royalty, the mirror is a clear example that a good ruler must be wise, introspective, and reflect the purity of their divine ancestors. The second treasure was the Kusanagi no Tsurugi sword, the blade of the cutting grass that Susanoo had found in the tail of the 8-headed dragon. This sword was not just a weapon, but a symbol of courage, strength, and the ability to confront evil and chaos. The sword represents the emperor's authority to rule justly, using force only when necessary to protect his people. The third treasure was the Yasakani no Magatama jewel necklace. The jewels, crafted from stone, were shaped like a kama and believed to possess mystical power. They represented the emperor's benevolence, compassion, and capacity for kindness toward his people. If the mirror symbolized wisdom and the sword courage, the jewels represented the emperor's heart, a symbol of his love and compassion. These 3 objects became proof that the Emperor of Japan was not merely a leader, but the direct descendant of the sun goddess. Their possession was the foundation of his legitimacy. And with these 3 treasures, Ninigi no Mikoto received not only a kingdom, but the responsibility to rule with wisdom, courage, and benevolence. And thus began the imperial line, a lineage that has endured for over 2,000 years. Once Ninigi no Mikoto had landed atop Mount Takachijo, the first descendant of the sun goddess was ready to rule. But for the imperial line to continue, he needed a wife. On his journey, he encountered 2 beautiful sisters, daughters of the mountain god. The elder was Iwanaga Hime, the princess of the eternal rock, and the younger was Konohana Sakuya Hime, the princess of the cherry blossoms. Ninigi, upon seeing the 2 sisters, was immediately drawn to the beauty of the younger one, Konohana Sakuya Hime. Her skin was as beautiful as cherry blossoms in spring, and her grace was unparalleled. Ninigi was not interested in the elder sister, Iwanaga Hime. He desired to marry the younger one and asked her father, the mountain god, for her hand in marriage. The father, seeing that the grandson of the sun goddess wished to marry one of his daughters, was overjoyed. He offered him both of them, explaining that if Ninigi married Iwanaga Hime, his life and the lives of his descendants would be as enduring as the rocks. But if he married only the cherry blossom princess, his life and the lives of his descendants would be as fleeting as the cherry blossom itself. Ninigi, without a thought for the future and blinded by Konohana Sakuya Hime's beauty, rejected Iwanaga Hime and married only her younger sister. In time, Konohana Sakuya Hime became pregnant. However, Ninigi doubted his paternity, believing his wife was not pure. To prove her innocence, Konohana Sakuya Hime locked her